Today we're going to turn a natural edge bowl from start to finish. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today we're going to turn a beautiful natural edge bowl with this piece of elm. I've got to thank my brother Aaron for getting this for me. He finds the best trees that turn into some pretty cool bowls, and I got to thank him for that. So thanks, Aaron. I greatly appreciate that. Now, if you could tell, this is relatively large, or was a large log. And what happened with this log was there were sections of it where there were cracks and things that were going on. So it wasn't easy to get a big slab out of it to make a large bowl. So instead, what I went through, and if you think about the end of a large log and divide it into pie sections, and you can get some interesting pieces out like this. This is going to shape into a nice natural edge bowl. Now, the other thing with working with a larger log is you get this relatively flat surface for where the rim will appear. If you can imagine where this rim is going to be here, there's some dips and valleys in there, but it's not as dramatic as a traditional kind of saddle rim. Like this live edge cherry bowl, it's just from a straight half of a log, and you can see the curve of the log here, and it's got that traditional saddle look you see a lot of times with natural edge and live edge bowls. By the way, this is live edge. When the bark is included, that's the terminology that's used, is live edge, and when the bark is removed, then it's natural edge. This particular piece of elm was very wet when I got it. It was also harvested in warm weather, and there was moisture, a lot of moisture under the bark, and everything that I was seeing from other pieces of wood from this tree, the bark was just flaking off, so there was no sense of trying to save it. And if I tried to save it and leave it on there, it was probably going to hold moisture, create some mold and rot, bugs, things of that nature. You get that, if you get wet bark like that, you want to get it off the tree if you can, or get it off your bowl blanks, because it's going to start the decomposition process and accelerate it. That's what the trees do. When the tree's down, it's going to start breaking down so it can become part of the earth again and help other trees grow. So if you want to make your bowl blanks last longer, make sure there's no moisture in them in that. But if you're lucky enough and you get a tree species that's holding the bark on and it seems to be pretty firm, it's not holding a lot of moisture under it, then leave the bark and try to make a live edge bowl. Today we're going to make a natural edge bowl, so let's get into it. All right, so I'm going to use a spurred drive center and the tailstock to secure this bowl blank to the lathe. Now, the reason I'm using this setup is I want to be able to adjust it as I go. Now, if you want to learn more ways to attach wood to the lathe, check out my video on 3 ways to mount wood to the lathe. There I'm going to show you how to use this setup as well as a faceplate and a screw chuck. Okay, so now the next thing I need to do is, after I've got this in the lathe, I need to take my time and make sure that I've got the top edges of where the bowl rim will be pretty much balanced. In other words, I don't want one rim to be much higher than the opposite side. So I just use my finger here to do that. I'm also, at the same time, I'm checking to make sure that the bowl blank is centered on the lathe, so I don't have more of one side coming to me than the other. Now I want to make sure that tailstock is tightened down, and then I'm going to drive it in very securely. Before I start anything like this, obviously we need to sharpen our tools. Now, if you haven't already seen, I've got a tool sharpening for wood bowl turning online e-course that goes over all of the shaping and sharpening of all the tools that you need to turn wood bowls, especially the bowl gouge, but also scrapers and things of that nature that have all the different tools that we use for turning wood bowls. If you want to learn how to shape them and why you want to shape them certain ways versus others, and how to sharpen them, then check out that course. I have a link of to that course down in the description below. Now, what I'm looking for here is the edge of the bevel coming up to the flute, essentially to the cutting edge. The cutting edge should have no visible surface there. Basically, those two edges come together, and that's it. Now, when I'm starting off with a rough, unbalanced piece like this, I want to keep that lathe speed low. I don't want there to be any vibrations in the lathe. I'm just going to take my time, and I'm going to knock off the corners of this gradually. It's not going to be smooth sailing here initially. Check out my video on how to adjust your lathe speed. That's going to give you some really good information as far as what lathe speed's best at certain times while you're turning. So the tool I'm using is a 55-degree bevel swept back bull gouge, and this is a 5/8 inch bull gouge. Now that has to do with the diameter of the shaft. The flute of this bull gouge is a 1/2 inch wide. And this is a larger bull gouge that's good for removing material and roughing out a bowl such as this. Here I'm getting the corners taken down a bit, but I'm also, as that's happening, I need to make sure that I'm moving that tool rest up. I've got a video all about the tool rest as well if you want to check that out. But the idea here is you want to keep that tool rest as close to the surface as possible, but not too close. Obviously you don't want there to be any connection with the bull blank and the tool rest, and you need enough space to get a good support of the tool on the tool rest. So what I'm doing is I'm just working this shape down, and I'm creating the exterior of the bowl. It's slow going. When you have a piece that's this roughly turned, or cut rather, it's a little bit slow going at first because you got to knock down all those high spots. And it becomes much easier once we have a continuous cutting surface and the bowl's completely round. Now here you can see I have a big flat spot on one side, and on the other side it's a little bit smaller. So here's where the advantage of this mounting setup comes into play. I can take the side that's not being cut and move it up just a touch. So now it's going to be more in the line of the bull gouge, and it's going to be easier for me to turn that away and at the same time even out this bowl blank. If I had mounted this bowl blank to the lathe with a faceplate, it wouldn't be as easy to make that adjustment as quickly as I just did right there. So now I'm starting to get a continuous cut through the lower portion of this blank, which is really nice. It makes it a lot smoother, but then I still have rough areas up towards the top edge. I have this bark enclosure in the side that I'm a little bit concerned with, but it doesn't seem to be too bad. It doesn't seem to be separating. I'm going to do some cuts across the base of this so we can start establishing where the tenon and the shoulders will be located. And I've stepped down to my 1/2 inch bull gouge. This is a 1/2 inch diameter shaft with a 3/8 inch wide flute. What I'm doing here is I'm just leveling off the bottom to get a good smooth surface. And in doing this, I'm making a little bit of a nub there on the tailstock. I really don't want that nub to be there, so I'm going to take that off here in just a little bit. I'm just going to use a hammer or a chisel and a mallet to knock that nub off. As I was doing this, what was happening is I could see that the wood grain is not splitting off flush across that surface. So I kind of went back and forth so I didn't tear out a big gouge of wood there. I didn't want that to happen. But what I want to do is I want to reduce that nub. I don't need that nub sticking out there and the tailstock being attached to that. I still have a lot of turning to do in this position. I don't want that to add any potential unwanted vibration to the turning. So I'll bring that back up to center, and now I've got that little nub out of the way. Now I'm going to mark where the tenon will be located. Using the dividers, I'm only touching with the left side. I'm looking to see that the right side of the dividers are directly over the circle that's being formed, and that way I know I've transferred that width of the four-jaw chuck to the tenon. So now I'm going to remove the area around the tenon to form the tenon cylinder. Now I'm going to create the shoulder that the tenon will be seated on. So what I'm doing here is this is giving me some leeway. This is going to give me a lot of flexibility down the road as far as the way that I want to shape that final foot of the bowl. Now I'm going to continue on with the shaping of the exterior of this. Now I did not finish that tenon, if you noticed. I did not put the dovetail angle in that yet. And the reason I do that is I don't want to establish a perfect tenon at this moment until I get the exterior of the bowl shaped. There's a chance that it could shift around just a little bit and be off center. So what I'll do with this is I'll shape the rest of the exterior, then I'll go back to the tenon and clean it up and make sure it's running true with the bowl at that point. So in that case, if it moved at all while I'm going, I can straighten it out. I still got some flat spots up here along the rim that I need to continue shaping to remove. At this point, I'm able to start seeing the round flowing curve of the outside of this bowl. The idea of what I'm trying to achieve is to make a curve that goes from one side to the other, but it's a very smooth, continuous curve without any interruptions or changes in course. For the moment, I'm avoiding that rim. I'm going to treat the rim a little bit differently. This wood is relatively dry, and I'm getting a lot of tear out up in the ingrain section, especially along the rim. To deal with that tear out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put some shellac in there. Now, if you haven't seen my video on how to make shellac, you're going to want to check that out. You can actually make shellac at home, and you can do it in such a way that it's this very pure, natural, clean product. Well, I shouldn't say clean, but it doesn't have a bunch of additives in it like the canned shellac that you can buy at like most hardware stores. The shellac's going to soak into those ingrain fibers and stiffen them up, and that's going to make it a little bit easier for me to cut them a little cleaner. And that's what I'm looking to do here, because I'm getting close to the final surface of the exterior of the bowl, so I want to make sure that those ingrain fibers are in good condition and aren't torn out. So I'm going to let this shellac dry and soak into the ingrain, and in the meantime what I'm going to do is go resharpen all my tools. Now this elm is relatively hard wood, and I've noticed pretty quickly how things were dulling. So the intervals of sharpening for this bowl are about every 10-15 minutes. The big thing that I try to instill in my students in the tool sharpening e-course is that you want to become aware of your cutting situation. So in other words, when you come off of the sharpening station and you're cutting at the lathe, everything should be at its optimum. In other words, you should have really good, clean cuts coming off with very little effort. You need to make a mental note of that. And you need to be aware of it, even though you're thinking about the bowl the whole time and what you're doing with the cut and that. You need to also be thinking about, wait a minute, is this getting duller, or is this requiring more effort than it was just a little while ago? And if it is, then you need to resharpen. All right, now we're starting to see the shape of the bowl here pretty well. What I want to do is I want to define the base of this bowl a little bit better. It's kind of a little ambiguous there at the bottom. I want that curve to be well defined so we can really see it going into what will be the foot area of the bowl. Right now, that's the shoulder for the tenon. So I did a little bit of a pull cut there to form that bottom corner, and now I've returned to a push cut. Now I'm using my more refined half-inch, the smaller half-inch bowl gouge here. Again, this is the 55-degree bevel with the swept back wings, and I'm using that to make this very fine finishing cut here along the outside of the bowl. As I'm making these cuts, I'm looking at the top of the bowl. I'm not looking at the bowl gouge. I'm looking at the top. So on the screen right now, what I'm looking at is I'm looking at the right side of the bowl and the shape as it's being formed. If you look at the bowl gouge, it's kind of like looking at your feet on a bicycle when you're riding. You're probably not going to ride in a straight line if you're looking at your feet. So instead, you want to be looking at where you're going. So I'm looking at the curve up on the top of the bowl. Now I need to be careful here, because if I go off the end of this rim, I'm running the risk of tearing out a lot of fibers there on the edge. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do an unsupported grain cut. I'm going to go against the grain from the rim down. This is not the ideal way to cut to support the grain, but in this instance, this is going to help me keep the edge of the rim intact so I don't rip it out by going the supported grain route. Now, if you haven't seen, I have a video on supported grain cuts. You might want to check that out. And you want to be cutting all the time in the supported grain direction. So I'm going to take that rim down just in that top area. The other thing too is I'm almost perpendicular to the grain, so the supported grain fibers is not a huge issue right there at that particular location. And that's looking really good. Okay, so now I'm going to use a shear scrape. If you haven't used a shear scrape yet with a bowl gouge, you're going to want to try this. Check out my video. It shows you exactly how to do all this right here. The shear scrape is really cool because it's this nice, this gentle, refining finish cut. You can leave the edge of the exterior of a bowl so smooth that it barely needs to be sanded when you use the shear scrape properly. I'm basically just using the bottom wing of that bowl gouge, as think of it like a razor, is just shaving delicately over the top surface of that bowl. And when it's done right, you're going to have these really fine shavings that are super thin. All right, so I'm happy with the curve and the shape of the bowl down at the bottom. Now we need to refine the middle section and along the rim. If you see a high spot or if you see a trouble area, take a pencil and mark it. And what that's going to do is going to help you get right to that spot so you don't mess around and you accidentally reduce the surface area in another location and then have to correct that. I found that just making a simple pencil mark and then using that as your guide is the best way to go. There's another location that needs to be adjusted. Now with the shear scrape, you want the tool rest at almost a 90-degree angle to the tool. This is much different than making a push cut. As you can see here, the tool rest looks like it's completely disoriented, except now you can see how it's supporting the shear cut. Again, if you haven't had a chance to check out the shear cutting or shear scraping video, you want to check that out. Just a really light cut there that's going to make that transition and smooth out that little bit of a trouble area. And there are those fibers. You can see how thin and light they are. We're not taking off much material, just a very, very thin layer. Okay, so now I'm back to the tenon area, and I'm going to true up the cylinders for the tenon and the base of the shoulder, and then I'm going to apply the dovetail angle so that this fits the four-jaw chucks properly. I'm going to clean up the side of that shoulder as well while I'm here. Now I use a spindle detail gouge to shape, just basically a push cut in at about a 10-degree angle to make that dovetail angle. And then I reverse it and then clean up the shoulder. Now that little corner in there needs to be free of any material. That will prevent the chuck from gripping properly if there's any debris in that little corner inside there. So I really want to make sure that that's cleaned out. It can actually be undercut a little bit and there's nothing wrong with that. Okay, so the exterior of the bowl is ready to go. Now we're going to reverse it and put it on the chuck and start working the interior. I get a lot of questions about that little ring on there, that little washer. I actually have a faceplate that for whatever reason doesn't reach all the way to the base of my headstock. And you definitely want to make sure there's a firm connection there with any chuck or faceplate that you put on your lathe. So I use that little spacer, that little washer, and I just leave it on there, and it works great with all my different chucks. I also get a lot of questions about the extension on my tailstock right there. My lathe has a bed extension on it. So if you see right underneath the bowl there, that section of the lathe can actually be removed. Those rails can be removed. So I can turn up to a 32-inch diameter piece with this. But to grip that, the tailstock has to do a little bit of reaching. So my lathe actually came with that extension. If you go to my website, turnawoodbull.com, up at the top you're going to see a recommended equipment guide. If you go down there, and inside that there's a variety of different categories. Look for lathe accessories and you'll see that tailstock extension. What I'm doing here is I'm actually removing a little bit of this interior just to balance out the blank. If you've been noticing, I've been speeding up the lathe just a little bit the more balanced this blank gets, and it's getting really close to being probably as balanced as it's going to be, meaning there's even weight distributed amongst the bowl blank. When that becomes more balanced, you can speed the lathe up. But again, check out my video on lathe speed because you're going to see what's safe and what isn't as far as turning bowls on. Turning bowls on the lathe versus turning spindles is dramatically different. And if you're coming to bowl turning from a spindle background, you really want to be aware of lathe speed and how you need to adjust that. So check out that video I referenced earlier about lathe speed. It's in my video library on the YouTube channel here. Okay, so I'm using my 5/8 inch swept back bowl gouge here, and I'm basically removing material out. And I'm going to be taking the edge of this interior down first. I'm not going to be coring out the middle and then working to the outside. If I were to do that, I'm not going to have enough support to turn those wings efficiently. So I'm stepped down to my 1/2 inch bowl gouge, and I'm going to establish the wall thickness right here at the rim of the bowl. I'm looking straight down. Now what I'm looking for here is I want to make the bevel of the bowl gouge parallel to the exterior of the bowl as I'm pushing this push cut straight into the bowl here. You're seeing my exact view as I'm turning here. This is what it looks like when I'm looking down on that. And you really want to be watching your cut with your body standing upright. So you don't want to be leaning over looking into the bowl. You actually want to be able to see down on the piece just like we're looking at right now. Okay, so I believe I've established the wall thickness there. I'm going to start removing some more material to take that wall down a little bit more. It's kind of like a ditch that I'm creating here along the inside edge of this wall. That center mass in the middle of the bowl is supporting those wings and preventing them from flopping around. And that center mass is very important for what we're doing right here. So I'm going to pick up where that previous cut was and then go inward. Now with that wall thickness established, I'm going to reduce the center mass by 1 inch or 2. And the way I do that is I use the left wing or the left tip of the bowl gouge, and I have the bowl gouge oriented at about the 10 o'clock position. So if the flute was straight up, that would be the 12 o'clock position. So it's turned to the left just a bit to about the 10 o'clock position, and I'm just making a series of parallel passes, but each one of them is going down just a little bit deeper. And what I'm doing is I'm reducing that center mass by a good 1 inch or 2 here. And this is going to be the method for creating these walls. We're going to start from the rim and go down. We're not going to return to the rim as we progress because that rim is going to start flopping around as that center mass is removed. And if there's any movement in those walls, especially in a natural edge rim like this, there's a good chance that you're going to get a catch or nick it and tear out part of that rim, and we definitely don't want that. So take your time and just make some nice cuts, nice cutting passes. The nice thing about this particular method is it's a great way to practice this cut and this pass. You can do it. You're just going to repeat it over and over again. It gives you great opportunity. You make lots of shavings, but it gives you a great opportunity to make this cut and get comfortable with it. Yeah, this elm tree is pretty interesting. It came down in a windstorm in the Midwest. It was actually 2 summers ago. This is pretty dry wood at this point, but there's still moisture content in it, believe it or not. And there's a pretty violent storm that came through, and my brother, who he heats his home with firewood, is very attuned to trees being down, or I think he can hear chainsaws running like 10 miles away. If he hears a chainsaw running, he basically just loads up the truck and goes and searches it out. He has he's kind of like a hound dog for finding available trees. So these people had this beautiful elm tree that came down in this windstorm in their farm, and they were out cutting it up, and unfortunately they used most of that tree for firewood. Oh, it was just painful to think about, but they did save a few pieces for themselves to do some woodworking, and they didn't want the crotches. And besides the crotches and some of these other pieces, that was basically all I was able to get from them. But you know what? Every little bit is great, and it's always fun to turn something different. I've heard people say this is a Chinese elm or Japanese elm, but I'm not quite sure. I do believe it's in the elm family, but I don't know exactly what species. So what I'm doing there is I'm trying to reestablish that wall thickness and make sure I've got it as thin as the first section on the rim. I've got a high spot here, and again, I'm marking that with the pencil, and I want to start my cut right there and take that wall thickness down to its final thickness. Now I have the flute very open there. It's almost at the 12 o'clock position. It's a very light cut. You don't want to do that cut and try to take out a lot of material that way, because it'll give you a catch. Now the material in the center of this bowl, I'm not trying to make that a nice smooth cut, so I can rip that out pretty quickly. You can see how thick those shavings are. I'm rotating the gouge probably to about the 9:30 position, and I'm allowing that left wing to do some serious digging and plowing out that wood. Interesting thing with this is if you get sidewalls that are, or the rim is even slightly closed, or if you have wings like this that are almost 90 degrees at the top edge, they grab all the shavings and they will hold them. You can see the shavings being captured up on the top of this bowl. There's something very pleasing about making those rings. It's almost like a Zen garden or something. But here's when, again, I'm taking this down about 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches. So maybe like 2.5 centimeters to 5 centimeters. I'm reducing that center mass. And as I keep reducing that center mass, I have to remember not to go back up to the top edge of the bowl. So we can't do that. We cannot get it back up to that top edge, because at this point that top edge is flexing and vibrating and it won't be cut smoothly if I introduce the bowl gouge to it. There you can see all the shavings being held in place. All right, and I've also put my curved tool rest on, and this curves inward, so I can get in there and get a little bit better support with the bowl gouge as I'm turning. So we'll take that center down just a bit, and then I'm going to work another couple inch section of the side walls. I'm taking the time to show you guys this whole process without speeding it up, so you get a realistic idea of what I'm doing here. It's a tough one for me, because I've watched the guys that you've probably seen on YouTube as well that speed this up so fast they can make a video like this and show it in 5 minutes. But I think that's fine if you just want to sit there and be entertained. I don't know how much you're learning as far as the skills that are being used with the tools and the different techniques that are being applied. It's kind of fun to watch it go by really quickly, but I would rather show you guys what I'm doing so you guys can learn from it. Okay, so here you can see where I picked up, or where I left off rather. Above that, or left of the bowl gouge now, I'm not going to go back to that area at all. And I'm just making some fine refining cuts here along that edge. You can still see it's a little bit high. I'm going to bring that down. I have that flute wide open, but I'm making a really light cut. If you look at that, it's probably a millimeter, maybe 2 millimeters thick. And that's it. That's it. So that area is done. So from the rim down to where I am now, I'm not going to return to that area because it's flexing and vibrating because that center mass is gone. With a bowl this large, you need to be aware. Actually, any bowl, especially if you make the sidewalls thin, there's going to be flexing that's going to be introduced when you get to the stage when the bowl is pretty much cored out and exposed like this. Now, this is a great tool. You're going to want to check out this video. This is the micro bevel. Check out the video that I'm showing you here if you want to learn more about this. The micro bevel this particular one is a 5/8 inch bowl gouge that has a 65-degree bevel on the front of it. Now, what that's allowing me to do is I can go almost straight in. If you look at my position there, I'm almost straight into the bottom of this bowl. And it gives me a little bit more flexibility to reach the bottom surface smoothly. And I'm making just delicate, light cuts with this. The other aspect of this bowl gouge is the bottom heel has been ground back so that it will not be in the way when I'm making a tight curve. I've had this question before pretty frequently is, what are the extra bevels on the micro bevel? Well, there's only one bevel, and that bevel's right underneath the cutting edge. The other curved cuts that you see underneath the micro bevel are the heel being ground back so it's out of the way. So if I'm in a smaller, tighter bowl, especially a deep one that I can't get to with any other bowl gouge, this micro bevel is going to be able to get there, and I'm going to be able to make a smooth cut. I don't have to resort to any kind of scrapers or anything of that nature. I can just make a really nice smooth cut. And here I'm just making a really delicate, gentle cut across the bottom of it. See, there's just a touch more there. There you can see those removed heels. So I'm going to pick up the bevel, and I'm going to make, again, it's like a millimeter, maybe 2 millimeters across the bottom of this bowl. Just want to go really light. You don't need any kind of vibration in that. There's a chance you're cutting too much material. So what you can do is you can close the flute a little bit more. In this particular cut, I could rotate the bowl gouge a little bit to the right, and then it's not cutting as much and it's less likely to get a catch. Now there's a high spot area that I'm finding that's between these two lines, and I've marked it so I can clearly see it while I'm cutting, and I want to focus just on that area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that area, and again, it's really fine, it's about a millimeter, but now I'm going to feather out that cut. I'm going to come off the bevel, and I'm barely cutting right there, as you can see. So that's going to take that whole surface and kind of blend it together smoothly. Now there is one little area that's not quite there, and I want to finesse that with the round nose scraper. If you want to learn more about round nose scrapers, check out my video. You're going to want to check that out. There's actually really cool tricks you can use to use this. This is a great tool to use to just get a very delicate edge and smooth it out. You don't want to go back in with a bowl gouge necessarily there, because you could introduce a deeper groove that could cause more problems. Check out my video on sanding, and I'll go through all the details of how to sand wood bowls. Essentially what I'm doing is I'm moving through the different grits. I'm starting at 80 because I've got some really coarse ingrain here that I need to smooth out. And then I'm going to move down to 120, 180, 240, and then 320. I've got this heart check here. This is a crack that's going from the pith out towards the rim. What I'm doing here is I'm forcing glue down into that hole. Now I'm not using CA here because I want to make this a long-lasting hold. CA holds well, but there's a lot of information that's coming out that CA basically will only hold for a period of time. Now it's relatively long, like 10 years or so, but there's stories of the CA glue joints separating, and that's not the case for wood glue. This is a trick that I use for filling cracks. You basically just force that glue down in there. Now I've got another one that's starting here. It's a very fine one. This is a heart check as well. It's moving away from the pith out towards the rim. Now watch what I'm doing. I'm forcing that glue down into that little crack, and then wipe as much away as possible, and then quickly sand with the grain over the top of that crack. And what's going to happen is you're going to make little dust as you're doing that, and that's going to form a skin and seal up that glue, and it's very hard to see after you've done it well. And with all side mounted bowls, you're going to want to flip that around and look at the 180-degree opposite side, because there's a good chance the same situation's going on there. And in this case it was. There's another heart crack that's on that side. Those are pretty minor, and now that we have most of the stresses of the wood removed, that's most likely not going to continue. So I focus sand along the rim and various areas and get those nice and refined and smoothed out. And then I can turn the lathe on and then sand along the flatter surfaces as well. But I don't want to do that, this particular type of sanding, right up along the rim. I want to take my time there. Now the edge of the rim I sand separately, and I try to keep the sanding pad as flush to the existing natural surface as possible. What I'm doing here is I'm basically trying to remove any bark debris, any material that's still attached to the wood. I just want there to be a nice smooth edge there. I've got a little bit of tear out there on the end grain still. I have to kind of accept that there's going to be a little bit of tear out here. There's pretty much no way around that. There are all kinds of tricks for filling it and things of that nature. I'm not going to go into... if this were a showpiece and I'm a long period of time turning it, then maybe I would sit there and fuss with that, but I don't typically turn that way. I try to make a bowl very, very good, but I'm not going to obsess to make it perfect, because you're just going to make yourself nuts doing that. At least I've found that to be the case in the past. So I do the best I possibly can with them and then move forward. Now what I'm doing with this is actually going to be a lacquered finished bowl. So I'm going to coat it with shellac. The shellac is going to help bind all those end grains together, and it's going to create a nice smooth surface for the lacquer to adhere to. I could spray the lacquer directly to the wood, but I would have to spray many more layers of lacquer to make it shine. It would be soaking it up for a while before it started to shine. By putting a simple coat of shellac on here, that lacquer is going to shine almost immediately. Now it's time to take the tenon off and shape the foot of the bowl. To do that, I'm going to use a jam chuck. If you haven't seen my video on how to make a jam chuck, you're going to like this. You can check it out. You can basically make a jam chuck for any bowl to reverse it and take the tenon off or shape the foot. I use a foam pad in there to protect the interior of the bowl, and then line up the bowl with the existing mark that the tailstock made. And now I'm going to remove the tenon. If you want to learn more about removing the tenon, check out my video on that topic. Basically, I'm doing two things at the same time here. I'm shaping the foot of the bowl. This is the exterior of the foot, and I'm merging that into the bowl shape. And then I'm going to establish the foot and remove the tenon at the same time. I'm going to take down some of this tenon material that I won't need. This is just a light push cut. You don't want to push too hard because you don't want to disturb the mount in the lathe. I'm going to clean up the edge of the foot here with just a simple, delicate push cut. And then I'm going to use a shear scrape to merge that new edge of the bottom of the bowl together. Here you can see the shear scrape. I'm dropping that handle and cleaning up that edge right next to the foot. I gotta be careful not to hit the foot. I can get a little catch there that way. So just bringing the tool right up to the edge of the foot and then just doing a delicate, as you can see the shavings coming off it. It's almost like I'm shaving with a razor just to smooth that surface right there. That'll do it. Looks good. I'm going to take the shape of that foot down just a little bit. It's looking a little bit big. Now, standing above this bowl, I'm actually looking at the entire shape of the bowl. So I'm trying to determine what proportion that foot's going to look best. compared to the overall size of the bowl. I don't want to make it too small. This is more of a functional piece. This is not so much of an artistic piece. I could make this foot smaller than that, but I want it to be functional as well. So I'm making the foot bottom flat so that it will sit flat on the table here. And now I'm going to remove material on the inside of that foot area so that the shape, the curve of the bowl is continued through the bottom of the bowl and through the foot area. So this is a little tricky to explain in a video, but I'm looking down on the bowl and I want to make that inside area cutaway so that it appears as if that curve of the bowl continues right through the foot. I'm using my 1/2-inch bowl gouge here, and I'm making left turns here. And you want to be careful not to engage the side of that foot because it will catch. You want to make very light cuts. I've got the bowl gouge completely open, so I want to make sure those cuts are super light. Again, you can see this is about 1 millimeter of material being removed at a time. I'm going to reduce that tenon a little bit so it's out of my way, and I can start seeing the shape of that bottom. And you can see here that the inside of that foot lines up with the curve of the bowl, and that's what I'm looking for. I'm checking to make sure that tenon's secure. If there's any kind of rot or crack or anything in that tenon area, there's a chance that that tenon can break off. I had that happen in my nutty bowl video. If you haven't seen the nutty bowl video, you want to check that out. Alright, so while I still have it attached here, this is going to be the easiest place to clean that up a bit and sand it. Now it's time to remove this nub. Now if you're not comfortable with this, you could cut that off with a little handsaw. You could cut it down and then sand it. It will sand off. You use like an 80 grit, it'll completely sand off. You can sand it down. What I'm doing here is I'm using my bowl gouge. That was my 1/2-inch bowl gouge, and I'm going to switch to my spindle detail gouge. The spindle detail gouge allows me to get in there at a little bit of an angle. This is just like the dovetail I was putting on the tenon. So I'm getting down there at this angle. And I'm checking again to make sure that nub is secure. It appears to be secure. There's a little bit of like a branch material in the wood, and I want to make sure that wasn't coming up into this nub. Okay, so I'm getting ready to power off the lathe at this point, and I'm applying pressure into that cut. And I'm going to manually turn it, and the spindle detail gouge will cut that completely off. You want to make sure you don't get too much grain tear out there when you take that nub off. Now I'm just going to pop it out of the lathe and sand the area where it was attached to the tenon. This you want to be really careful not to let the sanding pad bump into the foot or the sides of the inside of the foot of the bowl, because it'll easily leave a little sanded off mark on the inside of the foot. So you want to take your time, angle the sanding disc so it does not touch the outside of the foot. And then it'll be time to go sign the bowl. Now I use a wood burning system for signing. If you want to learn more about how to sign your bowl, I have an article on my website you want to check out. Go to turnawoodbowl.com/sign, and you can learn all about signing wood bowls, what to do and what not to do when you're signing wood bowls. In this particular wood, I'm using a chisel point, and I'm dragging it to make the marks. There are also pin attachments for the wood burners, and those work good. I've found that there's different tips work differently for different types of wood, so sometimes I'll change those out. All right, now I'm going to apply some shellac to the area of the foot so that it matches the rest of the bowl. And that way all of the surface will have a layer of shellac on it ready for our lacquer. Now I use a spray system that is pretty simple to set up. It's essentially a regulator and a wider hose. I believe this is a 1-inch hose, and then a very simple spray gun. If you want to learn about how to spray lacquer. Go check out my website again. There's a great article there, turnawoodbull.com/spray. Now I'm using a lacquer here. This is a lacquer that I purchased from a cabinet supply company. It's not easy to find online, but it is available. And I mix about 3 to 4 parts lacquer to 1 part lacquer thinner. That's how I thin the mix when I spray it. And I'm spraying at about 25 psi. So I keep the regulator, when I pull the trigger, it's reducing the amount of air there, but it will also recover. So it kind of bounces between 20 to 30 psi. Now I spray in quarter sections. So I turn the bowl 90 degrees. I spray the front in front of me and then across the center of the bowl on the inside of the bowl, and I keep rotating it until the whole bowl has been sprayed that way. I keep the spray gun about 8 to 10 inches away from the surface, and I'm making very light coats here. I'm going to put about 4 or 5, maybe 6 coats on this total. I'm putting very thin light coats, and what's great is it dries very quickly. So in about 10 minutes I'll put another coat on that, and I'll just go through this process. That's what we started with. And there's the finished result. Isn't that exciting? I'll tell you what, turning wood bowls is so much darn fun. Yeah, this is what we all have so much fun with, is once you've done a bowl like this and you can share it with others. It's so exciting. It makes you want to go turn another one. So there you have it, a natural edge elm bowl. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have, please click that like button. I know you're probably already subscribing, but if for some reason you're not, please subscribe. I would greatly appreciate that. And all of the items that I use in this video are listed in the description below. There's links for all of those. And if you're looking for other equipment to turn wood bowls with, be sure to check out my recommended equipment guide on my website, which is turnawoodbull.com. Throughout this video, I sent you guys off to other video links that are things that I'm doing here. And there's other articles on my website that are relevant to what we did here today with this particular turning. So you're going to want to check those out if you're interested. Tons and tons of information there. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for watching. And like always, until next time, happy turning.